Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and I will not be getting a high-speed rail line from West London to the centre of Birmingham anytime soon, because the flagship HS2 programme is going to be even later than planned and cost even more than planned. And the person who can tell us why we're hearing about this from the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, in Parliament today is the BBC's economics editor and professional future not yet built train line watcher, Faisal Islam. Hello, Faisal.
Hello.
Just explain to us what we've actually got from the government today, because this all comes with a bundle of documents as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple of documents that's come out. There's an update, 6-monthly update on the plan. There's a sort of reset announcement from Heidi Alexander, which was part of a debate and conversation in the House of Commons. And there's a very interesting 3-page letter where Mark Wilde, the chief executive of the programme now, where he tries to calculate what it would cost to cancel versus continuing and completing the project. So, and there's probably more documents, but those are the 3 that I've seen.
Okay, so let's talk about the headlines now. So the overall price has now risen to £102.7 billion. Unpack that number for us. I mean, we could spend several hours unpacking that number, but...
Well, a lot of that actually was because they kept on pricing it not adjusted for inflation, and of course, as we know, we've had one inflation shock, a massive one, a double-digit inflation shock, and inflation in construction is even higher, and then we may be starting another one right now. So that was a significant part of that. They've started to account for all the sorts of bells and whistles on the line that weren't accounted for, and they're obviously trying to
as in things that they were building or planning to build that hadn't been figured into the actual accounting of it.
Yeah, and increases in cost, and it's just worth reminding everybody this is just essentially London brackets in the early stages, not the centre of London, to Birmingham. It's not anything else, which we'll probably get on to talking about that in a minute. And so 100 billion is an extraordinary number. As I say, taking into account inflation, taking into account some of the other factors. I think they've tried to kitchen sink it. They've tried to sort of keep it below 100. I think 100 is the highest. But it's in 2025 prices, which is key. So it factors the inflation that we've seen.
And Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, who was giving this statement in Parliament today, said that a third of the increase was because of inflation.
Yeah.
And the other 2/3 is those other things, like not accounting for things that they were going to have to do, or overruns, or going for like the top of the range version of something when you could have gone for like a lower spec thing.
And so it's also sort of more colour on some of the story we have already heard about as to why it has cost so much, which is, as you just referred to, the sort of over specification of a line. In terms of its straightness, it's not making it visible in the shires north of London and south of Birmingham, and all these other factors. I think one of the key technical business reasons why we think it's cost so much is that they jumped the gun essentially on starting it in order to get shovels in the ground. And in so doing, they set up a whole load of contracts where ultimately, because the actual specifics weren't mapped out cleanly enough, as they are doing more successful projects, the risk just fell back onto the government. Because they started building. It's a bit like sort of Wallace and Gromit sort of laying out the track, but literally not knowing. I don't think Wallace and Gromit know where it's going either. But, do you see what I mean? Not knowing exactly where you're heading, and therefore the whole process gums up.
Yes. And also it was things that I was hearing, there was a lot of pressure when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and we were coming out of COVID to speed things up in that period. Right. And that was the time where the construction companies had the whip hand because there was lots of pent-up demand for construction. And so they could name higher prices and contracts where they took on less of the risk for price increases and the government took on more. And that was an equation the government at that time was willing to swallow because it got them what they wanted, which was building,
but at a now extraordinary cost of about £1 billion a mile, which, I mean, is unbelievable. One just needs to state this compared to anything else we've seen in the world. And a truly, truly extraordinary amount of money. And it should be said that is to complete the part or the subsection of this train line with the least economic benefit. The entire rationale of this line was to help rebalance Britain. I was there at the launch with Andrew Adonis, 2000 and possibly 8 or 9,
under Transport Minister at the time,
Gordon Brown, and then it got sort of fleshed out under Justine Greening and the like in the early days of the coalition. But the entire rationale, and you could see it, we're a long, narrow island, service sector economy, it's quite like Japan, suits high-speed rail to kind of help, if you like, the whole of the island become part of one coherent economy, helps rebalance a lopsided economy that's maybe...
Yeah, because the original plan was London to Birmingham and then a Y shape where one half of the Y went to Leeds and the other half went to Manchester, and then eventually you could maybe even extended it from Manchester to Scotland.
Yeah.
And what we've ended up with now is, as you were saying, Old Oak Common, which is in the outskirts of West London, to Curzon Street in Birmingham. And that's basically going to be it for a while.
That is what this... The amazing thing is that is what the cost is for. Literally the stump of
so
the
this
Y.
is not even including getting it from West London into Central London at Euston Station.
No. So I think it does include some of those costs. You're right. But I'm saying it doesn't include getting...
The Y bit, which is all gone.
And so, I mean, I think I can categorically state is if they'd known that this part would have cost this amount of money, it never would have been... It never would have been commissioned in the first place. And then it goes a bit deeper. You sort of think about this, and it could be said that the budget and more for the entire Y has been blown on essentially burying the least economically beneficial part of it, London to Birmingham or Old Oak Common to Birmingham, in the ground, in tunnels and in verges, in order to hide it from people in the shires.
Yeah, because I remember at the time when David Cameron was Prime Minister, even members of his own cabinet, like Cheryl Gillen, I remember it so clearly, she was an MP for that part of the world, and she was fighting on behalf of her constituents to get it put in a tunnel, and Cameron was under political pressure, had to cave, if you pardon my underground metaphor, and so it went in a tunnel.
Yeah, and so when people ask, well, why can Japan... So Japan seems to be able to build high-speed lines through the middle of mountains, like, more cheaply than we have managed in the Chilterns, okay, which I have to say, a different size of hill. So it's an extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It really is extraordinary to think that the cash for essentially the entire project was spent on trying to pretend the project wasn't there in the least economically beneficial part of it.
And then help me understand this bit I can't quite get my head around, which is reducing the speed of the trains when they do eventually run on this line. How does that save money?
It saves money because it means that the trains don't need to be tested, which we can't do in the UK and we'd have to do somewhere else. They haven't bought the trains yet. At these extremely high speeds, sort of 220 miles an hour. And by lowering the speed, you don't have to do that. So that's a couple of billion saved.
Right.
Now, if you just have this stump of London to Birmingham, I was trying to do the maths in my head, and this was an involved physics question, basically, which I couldn't quite work out, and I've forgotten all my physics. But you imagine if it's only this sort of, sub 100-mile line, like going 300 miles, it would barely have accelerated up to the top speed before it starts having to decelerate.
Yeah.
And yet the whole line is designed to carry that speed. It's straight for that reason. And indeed, and this is the chef's kiss on this fiasco, frankly, is that because they were designed for the straight line was designed to accommodate the extremely high speed. Now they're no longer going north of Birmingham. The plan is eventually in the 2040s for it to join the West Coast Main Line. The West Coast Main Line is bendy, and that therefore means that the high-speed trains on the West Coast Main Line will go slower than the existing trains right now by 15 miles an hour because they can't tilt, as you all know.
Yeah.
So you literally will have slower trains than were specified for what's called High Speed 2.
And also this feeds into a bit into the findings of the review by Stephen Lovegrove, the former senior civil servant who carried it out. He said actually the company HS2 Limited that was set up to deliver the project sort of became evangelists for the concept of high-speed rail and ever faster trains, rather than just a company that was there to get spades in the ground and deliver this railway efficiently.
Yeah, and deliver the capacity that is needed. Because the
existing railway line is going to be full.
Well, this is the other question mark. Well, I mean, and I think it is briefly worth unpacking this. The West Coast Main Line is, I think, the busiest mixed-use line in the whole of Europe. It's 90% full, 15 trains an hour, and that's now, right, 10, 15 years. And then somehow you're going to get these much longer trains onto the same line. The West Coast Main Line, or the connection between London, Birmingham, Manchester, and onto Scotland, and in reverse, is a critical piece of infrastructure for this country, essential to the economy. It is full, and the alternative now could help to some degree, but it's very, very messy. So I do actually wonder, despite the sort of overarching fiasco that I'm describing, whether the full line actually does in the end get built.
Okay. And just in terms of the timelines, so there's various dates flying around and various date ranges. What is the sort of latest date that people are talking about here? I think that would be Euston Station in central London to Birmingham. That would be in 2043? That would be
something like that. And beyond, and then beyond on the connection onto the West Coast Main Line. Yeah. So that's you're talking mid-2040s, right? Yeah.
So I'll be 63.
Mid-2040s. To get on a functioning HS2 train, albeit on a relatively small bit of track between Old Oak Common and Birmingham, you're talking 10 years at the earliest, 13 years.
So maybe 2036.
2036, yeah.
So I'll only be 56 then.
Then you've got little details like when you arrive at Curzon Street, this is a beautiful piece of architecture. We both went, didn't we?
Yeah, we got a little tour of the building site.
A tour once. And I think it's got 4 like plank, I forget what you call them, sort of floating bits of a viaduct that were meant to accommodate 7 or 8 platforms, and only 3 will be functioning. 4 will not have rail line, so they'll just be empty. They'll just be there, but you'll be able to see them.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they'll do.
Well, because another one of the findings in these many documents that came out today is that knocking down infrastructure that's no longer necessary, or just giving up on the whole thing, would cost so much more.
Now, this is fascinating, right? And one of the reasons is it's been built. Well, this is understandable. This high spec nature. It's built to be able to last 120 years. So we're talking about a piece of infrastructure that should last till the 2160s. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure everyone will be flying in strange drone things by then. Yeah. But because it's been built to those spec, the viaducts, the tunnels, everything, it would be extremely expensive to deconstruct. And the law requires you to remedy it back to what it was before. So filling in all the tunnels, dismantle the viaducts, whatever it is. Yeah. And so they came up with a piece of maths that I think people might argue with the exact point, and they comes in ranges, but roughly speaking, the numbers that they point towards is that, yes, it's going to cost 60 billion to complete from here. 40 billion's already been spent, but it would also cost somewhere between mid-30s and 60 billion to cancel. So that is their argument of why we should push on.
You alluded to our little site visit that we did a few years ago in Birmingham as a sort of little side quest from the Tory party conference, because we got invited by HS2, didn't we, to come and have a look and put a hard hat on. Yeah. And I know you've been to see various bits of it since, and I went to see Old Oak Common in West London a few months ago. What were your just impressions as a human being seeing the building sites?
Well, I not only saw that, at an early stage, I also saw HS1 being completed in St Pancras, and you never get the chance to ever do this stuff again. It's like a giant road, and people should go and have a look on Google Maps or something. You can see it's just sort of carving through in a relatively straight line, London to Birmingham, and it is a remarkable piece of engineering, and there's lots of tunnelling as well. And obviously you can see why the local communities were frustrated. There are beautiful little houses that have been compulsorily purchased, all that sort of stuff. But I think this is the point where you've got to think about the international context. You know, there are what we would have called emerging or developing countries building this sorts of infrastructure all around the world, much faster, much cheaper. Now, clearly, they don't have the same attachment and understanding of property rights as we do in this country, right? And that's why they're able to build it more cheaply. But in terms of this infrastructure, a number of non-G7, non-G20, frankly, emerging from Morocco to Uzbekistan to Egypt, are now building trains that I think will train networks of this type. A lot of it's funded by China. So, what will happen is I think people will start to think, oh, do we not need this in this country? Do we not need this sort of infrastructure? Or are we falling behind other countries? Are we going to wait for some other quantum leap, as it were, in transport technology? But yeah, it's been a fiasco.
I've got two takeaways from seeing Old Oak Common, and one is actually about takeaways, in that they have this system for carting away all the soil that they've dug out because they had to dig a massive, massive hole. And they've got this very complicated conveyor belt system that funnels all the soil onto this conveyor belt, which then takes it quite a long way away from the actual hole, and that's so that they can then load it onto trucks in a way that causes minimum disruption to the local communities, because people didn't want like hundreds of trucks going past their schools every day and all night. 1 year it was kind of wetter than they were expecting, and so therefore the soil expanded more. So they had more soil, more volume of soil to take away. And that was just a reminder to me of like how these things are a little bit unpredictable and why you have to sort of build in lots of headroom and unpredictable kind of stuff on top of it. And then the other takeaway was just the bits of this that have been built are really big and really impressive.
Yeah.
Old Oak Common will have 14 platforms and be connected to the existing rail line that goes west. It will be connected to the Elizabeth line, which is the relatively new train line that goes across London, and it will serve something like 100 destinations. So it's a bit like building a huge new train station version of Waterloo, but actually in quite a small area of land that's surrounded by houses, warehouses, schools, roads, and existing railway lines. So just as a sort of like bit of gee whiz stuff, it is occasionally quite impressive.
Yes, but this whole saga raises a fundamental question, which is more than about just train lines, transport infrastructure. It's about, can we build the stuff that we need to function as an economy and as a society, and can we build it quickly enough? And it applies to housing, it applies to transport infrastructure, it applies, and can we plan? Can we think long term? And as I said, other nations that are rising can do this. There are various reasons why we're not doing it, but it's not an accident. It's not just like our civil engineers are rubbish. It's a social choice. It's a political choice. We choose, rightly or wrongly, to say the property rights of the people in the Green Shires north of London really matter and can stop a nationally important infrastructure project. It applies to nuclear power as well. It applies to the fact that we're generating a lot of green energy right now, but we don't have the pylon capacity to transmit it where it's needed because people don't like pylons either. So I think occasionally people can fall into the mistake to say, well, just, it's all rubbish and isn't it terrible? No, these are choices, right?
Yeah.
These are choices, and these are choices that aren't being made elsewhere, and these are the consequences of them.
Well, Faisal, thank you very much. And I was going to say, I'll see you on HS2 when we've got our over 60s rail cards. But then actually the public finances might mean there won't be over 60s rail cards for us. They might be phased out by then.
No, and who knows how much the train journey on one of these things will actually cost. And you'll get no view either because it'll be in a tunnel the whole time. But hey,
we'll have the memories.
It'll be like a tube line
site, though.
We could just rename it. We should integrate it into the London tube system. That'd go down well.
Yes, people outside London would love that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, a big development today in the Grenfell Tower fire situation. This is the fire in 2017 in a tower block that killed 72 people. And the development today is that the Metropolitan Police in London say they are preparing to hand files of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service in September this year, so that the CPS can then make a decision about bringing criminal charges. A long-awaited moment by people who've been affected by the Grenfell Tower fire, by people who were angry about it, by people who wanted justice after it, because it now looks like the justice process, the wheels are turning. The wheels having been sort of paused while there was an official inquiry into the fire, which ended 2 years ago. So the person who can help us unpick all of this and work out what's happening is the BBC's Tom Symonds, who's been covering this story for years and years and years and is in that part of West London for us now. Hi, Tom.
Good evening, Adam.
Just explain where you are at the moment and what the area looks like now, all these years later.
Well, Adam, I've been coming here for years covering this story, and it's quite a shock to see the tower, which is just behind me, being reduced in size almost by the week. And the very iconic sign at the top of it, Grenfell Forever in Our Hearts, put there by the community many years ago now, gradually coming down as the tower comes down. I think they move the sign down as they remove each floor. And it's right next to the Kensington Academy and Leisure Centre, which played its own part in the Grenfell story. It's a fairly new school and leisure centre. And the view was that when that building was being built and they wanted to make it look good, that it would be not very good if Grenfell Tower next to it looked a bit old. It dates back to the 1970s. So that's why Grenfell was refurbished, and that was obviously a disastrous decision which led to flammable materials being put on its walls. But it's a great community. I've been coming here for years and have met a lot of people in this area, and it is just this place here that has always been here and everybody will always remember.
But Tom, earlier on today, you were at New Scotland Yard, HQ of the Metropolitan Police, for this briefing that they were giving to journalists. Why were they doing this now?
Well, we're coming up to the 9th anniversary, if you can believe it, of the fire. And the police know that every single twist and turn of this criminal investigation has a resonance for the people in this area and the people who survived the fire. So they wanted to make sure that those victims and survivors knew exactly what was going on before we got anywhere near the difficulties that they'll almost certainly go through around the time of the anniversary. And so the news today is quite significant, though not conclusive, because the police are saying that they believe that there may be up to 57 individuals and 20 companies or organisations that may face charges. What's the process? Well, they effectively put a file of evidence together, and they pass that for each case to the Crown Prosecution Service, the prosecutors. And it's the prosecutors who have to decide whether there will be charges. But we are getting close now to September, when those files will be handed over. As I said, a key moment in this long investigation.
Although it sounds like some files have been handed over already, and so the process has sort of started.
Yeah, what happens is the police over the years pass files of information, let's call it, to the CPS, and the CPS in return says you need to go away and find out this, or you need to consider the role of this person or this organisation. There's a kind of advice process that goes on, so that's what's been going on. But the final process of handing over, if you like, the case to the CPS is the moment when the CPS takes control of these many cases, and they are complicated. We're looking at potential corporate manslaughter charges, gross negligence manslaughter, fraud, which is obviously a complicated thing to investigate, breaches of health and safety that can also be very complex. And so the CPS has a team of 20 lawyers and barristers who will have to look at this over the next year. And they've said it might take them a year, which means that it might not be till June 2027 before there are final decisions about charges. And that, of course, is 10 years since the fire.
Yeah, I can see why what the police have said today is a milestone, but why to lots of people, particularly families who've been affected by this, think that it's still quite a long way off.
Yeah, and Grenfell United, which is one of the bigger groups that represents people in this area who've been affected by Grenfell Tower, they said they're not celebrating. They think it's ridiculous to have to wait 10 or more years for justice. Even if they get justice, they said in their statement. And another group, Grenfell Next of Kin, has often made the point to me that the inquiry into this tragedy, the public inquiry that took so many years to complete, finished taking evidence in 2022 and delivered a report a few years after that, that came first. Grenfell next of kin would much rather the police have decided on these charges before the inquiry. Now, that has happened in previous major disasters that I have covered, but in this case it didn't. I think part of the reason was that the police needed the inquiry to do a lot of that technical work around the causes of fire, the way fire spreads, the way materials are decided upon and used by the construction industry. Now, the police have done parallel work on that because they have to investigate a crime potentially, not just what happened and how it happened, but they felt that the inquiry was slowed down by the decision to come after their inquiry, to come after the public inquiry, but they don't think it's been impacted by it. So I think that's what they would say.
And Tom, just do the law school bit for us. How do the Crown Prosecution Service actually decide whether these cases, some of them, all of them, none of them, actually go to court to be prosecuted?
Well, they'll look at cases against individuals, cases against companies. They'll look at whether there's enough evidence. That's obviously a key decision. They have to be, if you like, 50% certain of getting a result in court. In the case of corporate manslaughter, that can be very complicated. There's the law has changed in the last 10 or so years, and it can be very difficult to prove that a company is responsible for something like what happened here. So they have to, that's the first test, if you like, is there enough evidence? And then finally, is there a public interest in prosecuting? Now, in this case, it's hard to see that there wouldn't be a public interest in prosecuting a company or an individual for the loss, potentially, of 72 lives. But that is the second stage in what is a two-stage test. And then, of course, the case potentially may go to court. And even that is fraught with difficulty because, as we know, the Crown Courts, and it would be in a Crown Court, are absolutely stuffed with the cases on backlog. And therefore, the best estimate of when we might see a trial begin is 2029, and potentially after that. It's going to take a long time, and actually the police know this, so they're going to spend the time before now and then looking to build a replica of parts of Grenfell Tower so that when their jury is sworn in and has to start considering these complex matters, that they'll have something to look at, because of course this building is not going to be there. Sadly, the criminal investigation will outlast the building that is being investigated.
Tom, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on all of this and for all your hard work on this story for, as you said, nearly a decade now.
Thanks, Adam. And it has been a long time, but I think there's a lot of people who are still waiting, and they've been waiting a lot longer than I have for these results.